I'm just delighted to be asking you all about your new book, which is called, I'm sorry, but it's on my phone at the moment. It's called Loose Ends. It's just come out. I was really privileged to get the chance to read this in advance of publication, and I really enjoyed it. It's set in World War II and features two young women whose lives get turned upside down, in particular Ness's, by one small seeming little joke. So I'm just going to say that I'm going to ask a few questions, but I anticipate you're going to be full of talking about the book and telling us all about it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, because I haven't asked you some of these questions, what was behind the book. So, first question then, where did the idea come from?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. It's rather odd because it was a long time ago. It was 2014 when I started this novel, and then I just put it to one side because lots of other things happened. So I haven't actually been working on it 10 years, but I did work on it. I did complete it. And then I thought, no, I don't like it the way it is. So I put it away again. But the original idea came because I was watching a program on the television with Michael Portillo, who does these train journeys. All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the one I was watching, he was in Derry, in Northern Ireland, in Derry, and he went to a shirt factory. And he spoke to a couple of women who didn't work there anymore. I think they'd retired. I just remember it being in a canteen. It was 10 years ago now. They were sitting in the canteen talking and having a cup of tea. And these two women were laughing. They were jolly good fun. And one of them said, well, of course, you know what the girls used to do, don't you? And he said, oh, no, what? And she said, well, they used to put their name and address in the pocket of one of the shirts that they'd be packing.
Okay.
And I thought that is such a good thing, such a good idea for a story, for a book. And so I went away and thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I began it, and it began very differently, but it's always had that premise, always had that little idea at the beginning. And I
Oh,
did, well, you're going to ask me anyway, probably, but I decided not to set it in Northern Ireland because it was too complicated uh,
mhm.
for, for just what I wanted to do with it. But yeah, that was what started, that was the little thing that started it off.
Okay, so we'll come back to where you set it later on, but
Yeah.
um, why did you set it during the war?
Well, I can't even remember why that happened, but I think we're probably going to cover this as well. But I think it was a period that I wanted to write about anyway. And I was thinking now and how can I work this? I mean, I was born after the war, not that long after it, but we won't go into details. So I was born after the war, so it was quite a lot of talk when I was young about the war and what happened and what it was like and rationing and all that stuff. I mean, I have an identity card, and I did have a ration book when I was very little. And I just thought I would really like to write about that period in time. And as the characters sort of developed in my mind, um, can I talk about that now because it's sort of
Yeah,
relevant
cool.
really as to why
Yeah.
I did it then. So I thought about the characters, and I decided that they would, these two would be two women, and they would work in a shirt factory because of because of the original idea. And I don't know why I thought about my mum, and I thought about my mum's friend, and those two people, I definitely didn't base the characters particularly on them, but I thought about them a lot, and I thought about the way they lived and what my mum did, because my mum used to sew all the time. She used to made all my clothes. I was on the stage in those days. I did a lot of dancing, and I was always on the stage doing competitions. And my mother made everything, and I learned to sew. And my mum's friend was actually um, she was a midwife, so there's no connection there at all. But it was her character. She was really jolly and funny, and she used to like a good laugh. And so those really are the two bits of their characters. But I mean, you're a writer. What happens is you start with that, and then
They just decide to do their own thing.
they decide to do their own thing. They grow and they become other characters. So to say that they were, I mean, very, very loosely based. And mainly it was because I had a photograph of my mum. I think I put it on Facebook the other day, and the way her hair was and everything in the 40s. And I just thought, I just love that period. So it made sense to set it then, because then I had the idea that I discovered that during the war, the shirt factories, they had to stop, most of the factories had to stop making what they normally made because they had to work for the government. And I discovered that the shirt factories had to start making all the kit for the army, the navy, and the air force. And I chose the navy because my dad was in the navy. And
Right.
I had a picture of him in his shirt. I've got it here. I don't know if you can see it, but I had a picture of him in his sort of rig,
Yeah.
his summer rig out thing. And
Huh?
it's got the two pockets at the top. And I thought, oh yes, great. That's great. And so that's how it kind of snowballed from there, really.
Excellent. And in terms of location, obviously, it starts in Yorkshire, but we've also got Devon in there, war-torn London. There's also the ocean. I'll leave the ocean out of it. But why
Yeah.
did you pick the other three? Um,
Well, I wanted, because it was a shirt factory, I knew it had to be in an area where there was lots of linen and shirt making. And so that was how I came to use Yorkshire. And I wanted to move her out of Yorkshire. And I wanted Ness to want to get out of her town. I mean, it could have been a little town anywhere. It wasn't
Mm.
sort of, oh, I have to get out of this town in the north. It was just a small town. The idea of a small town and wanting to get out and maybe go to London. So that's how I chose Yorkshire for the town for the where the factory was. And I wanted to get her down to London. I chose Devon because I know Devon very well and I love Devon, but it wouldn't have worked to have her working in a factory in Devon. That just wouldn't have worked. And then Leytonstone, because I know Leytonstone and my mum's friend, who I based Eileen on, lived in Leytonstone and I'd been there quite often to her house and visited. So I knew Leytonstone quite well. I was born in North London and I knew that Leytonstone was in an area of like East London, where of course all the tailoring happens in East London, a bit closer to town really. But I thought, well, that'll do. And I did a bit of walking the streets as well in Google Maps. You know how you can walk.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I found the area where there could have been a warehouse or a factory and everything. So yeah, it worked really well. So
Excellent. Okay. So, is there anything else you've obviously talked about Ness and Eileen a little bit about who, not exactly who they're based on, but what sort of triggered who they were? Is there anything else you want to say about them? They're quite different in personality.
well, they are, because I think you need that. I
Mm.
think if I had to work quite hard with Ness not to make her boring. I just needed to have have she needed some sort of guts and something coming from somewhere that would make her more interesting. What else can I tell you? Eileen, I think, is probably a bit of a good time girl. She likes it. She likes to party, whereas whereas Ness is much more at home, reading a book, concentrating, thinking about what she can do in her life. And Eileen doesn't really. She's not too bothered, really. What'll happen
No,
as far as
yeah.
I'm
But
concerned.
Eileen, of course, it's what Eileen does at the beginning of the book that completely changes the course of Ness's life. It's just an off the cuff question, but is that the sort of thing you do?
No, I don't think I would. No, I don't think I would. I mean, it's basically a practical joke, isn't it? I'm not really a practical joke person. I'm too frightened. I have to put my hand up and say, no,
You're
no,
goody two.
it's only a joke. Yeah.
Okay, so we got this instant that sort of starts off the whole book, starts the ball rolling for Ness, and as I say, changes the way that her life probably might have gone one way and ends up going a completely different direction. What do you think throughout the book are her biggest challenges without giving too much away from the plot?
Well, I don't think I need to give away. I think, and to be fair, the challenges haven't actually changed that much. I mean, that there's this whole thing of misogyny and a woman, anything that women want to do, it's very difficult for women to say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and to be successful at it. I think you have to work really, really hard. um so yeah, I think it's a big challenge for her to get to where she wants to get to without giving anything away, and it's not easy. If she were a man, it would have been a lot easier, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I think that's our the main issues, which are, they're still around today, unfortunately.
yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of dressmaking, obviously, in the book. It starts in a dressmaking factory. We talked about your mum doing a lot of dressmaking. My
Mm.
gran was the same. Do you know? Are you a dressmaker yourself, or?
Okay, I'm not a dressmaker, but I do make dresses. I do make things. I mean, I think a lot of women of my age do. I think we were taught to sew. We were taught to sew at school, actually. But I wouldn't say I was a dressmaker. I mean, I have made a few, even recently, a couple of years ago, I made a couple of summer dresses and a jacket, but they never turn out exactly, they're not as good as Ness's. Definitely not. But I don't mind. Oh, and of course, I had a dancing school for many years, ran a
Yeah.
dancing, and we had shows, and my partner Marilyn, we had to make a lot of costumes then for the children, and so you get into it. But costume making for the stage is a bit
It's
different.
different. Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
need to tidy it off quite so much. You don't need to do the old steams and all that stuff, do you?
No. Going back to the World War II setting, obviously that would have taken a bit of research for you to do, because you didn't live through it, and although it's a sort of you've got a sort of popular image of it, the reality is sometimes a bit different.
Mhm.
And you were talked also about Ness's restrictions, and of course, on top of all the restrictions that she would normally have had, that she might even have now, you've got the additional restrictions that were brought in by the war, things like men either being there when they perhaps shouldn't have been there and feeling like they ought to be somewhere else, and men being away, obviously, and then just the no petrol, no tea. I imagine. Um, so, how did you incorporate that? What sort of research did you have to do to try and get that element of it right without it be feeding too? Because it doesn't. Sometimes you feel like you're just being given a history lesson, and it didn't feel like that. But you did get that feeling of, oh, we've got to use the tea bags. You've got to use the tea leaves again. You've got
Yeah.
to you've got to be careful with the petrol. There's not so much of this, blah blah blah. So it came across as just being a natural the way of life, and a bit of a pain in the neck. But you still would have had to have looked into that. So how
Yeah.
did that go?
Well, I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of research. I read some magazines from the era. I went to the Imperial War Museum, looked up a lot of stuff there. Nella's last, no, what's it called? I've
Well,
written it down, so
yeah,
yeah, Nella's Last War was a
yeah,
great resource. I
yeah.
believe there's another one too, but I just used that one because
Mm.
that's a woman's diary during the
Yeah.
war, which was organized by the government for
Mhm.
people to write down what their ordinary lives were like. And so that was very handy with the Red Cross and everything else. And then of course you've got the Make Do and Mend. I got a book about that, which is about using the clothes you've already got. And I mean that was quite a difficult issue for me to deal with because I wanted her to be able to make clothes, but I had to make sure that it was being done in the right way.
Mm.
So yes, reading. I went up to a small town in Yorkshire. I'm not going to say where because I didn't really base it, but I went to their local museum and had a look round, and they had also had some great magazines from the time. I think probably a lot of towns do. So
Mm.
you could. When I say from the time, I don't really mean from the time. I mean they have history magazines of history of the town, and so I could look up for what was happening there in 1940, 1941, 40. I could get a very, sort of
Mm.
selection and have a look to see what was going on, how the people were living, what they were doing. And of course, it's always hard for us to believe, I think. But in fact, my mum always used to say, well, you just kind of carried on
Yeah.
after the initial, oh, we're at war, panic, we can't go anything, we can't do anything, we can't go out. That you sort of stop doing that and you get used to it and you just carry on living. You go to the cinema, you go to the shop, you walk down the road, you meet people. You don't all sit in your houses with everything shut up, which is what somebody I would imagine. I think, oh, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, I've got letters between my grandparents. My grandfather was in reserved occupation, also a bit too old to be serving. Stayed in London, and my grandmother took my father and lived in the country for a little while when it was at its height. And I've got their letters, and they don't mention the war at all. It's just all such and
Yeah,
such happened. So yeah, that's sort of right at the height, obviously, of the Blitz, and it's just
yeah,
there may be little bits in there, but it's not very much. It's like you say, you just have to get on with life, don't you?
yeah, yeah. It's strange, but
So
true.
you've talked about Ness and Eileen. Obviously, there are lots of other characters in there, but they're not all nice.
No.
And what happens isn't all nice and happy and just sewing machines and reusing your tea leaves and so on. So, how did you find that? I felt that you handled that very well, but how did you find it to write?
Um, I was okay writing it because I don't know why it is or what it's like for you, but I can step back from my writing. Um, before I wrote this, I wrote a very emotional book because I wrote a memoir about the loss of my son, and I was able
Mm.
to write all of that absolutely without any problems. But when I read it back, that's when I feel the emotion. So,
Right. Okay.
I don't, I can step back and write it because I feel detached from it. I don't get, I don't know, maybe it's some theatre thing I've done, I don't know, but I am able to do that. So I could think about it clearly, and, which is, I hope is why it works, because I haven't got to, I thought about what might happen. We don't want to give any spoilers away, but I think that's how I handled it, by being detached from it, really.
Did you feel emotion when you read it back though, when you were going through
Um,
editing it?
and not, no, not in, I felt finesse, and I thought, yeah, so well, hopefully that was why I did it. I think I did it okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think you did. I genuinely did. Okay, so obviously it's not, as I say, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of little bits of humour and so on and so forth. Um, what is your favourite part of the book, do you think?
Oh goodness, my favorite part of the book. Phew. Um, well, I like lots of little bits of it. I think I like the bits where they go to Devon, because it's not, it's reminiscent for me, and I hope anybody who reads it will think that I got it okay. Uh, I like that, and I like the London bits, and
Mm,
I like part two as well. Part two is quite short, really. It all sort of happens rather quickly, but I didn't want to drag the book on and on. I wanted that. That's how I wanted it to be. So hopefully
mm,
it works all right. It
yeah.
might be a bit short for us. I saw somebody today that's read it, and she said, "Oh, I loved it. It was really good, but I wanted to go on now. I want to know what happens next."
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Well,
That's
it is good,
great.
but then when I spoke to my husband today and I said that, I said, the problem is I think it might be a bit boring from now on.
I know that's the trouble. People say, "What happens next?" You go, "What?"
I don't know. I think it's whatever you want happen
Yeah,
next.
exactly. So this is your first novel.
Yeah.
Um, what made you decide to write one?
Well, I think it's always been there. I mean, I've always written. I've always been a writer. I've written all sorts of things, plays, poems, everything, And the idea of writing a novel really appealed to me. Um, and I thought about this when I started it 10 years ago, but I found it very hard. I couldn't do
Mm,
the structure. I couldn't do this, couldn't do that. So then I did my memoir, and I did that after I'd done an MA in creative writing. So then I had a lot more idea about structure.
mm,
The memoir was easy to structure. It was done as letters, and it was very easy to do. This was much harder. It's really hard to write a novel. Anybody that thinks it's not. It's easy to get it all down on the paper, but then, sorting it out after that, once you've got that idea and making sure it all works, it's jolly
mm.
hard work. So I'm glad I've done it, and I've always wanted to do it. And now I wouldn't mind doing it again. In fact, I'm definitely going to do it again, because now I know what I'm doing.
Oh well, we'll come on to that in a bit. So when you were doing it, you've talked a bit about the structure. So that sounds like there's a sort of thing that people say is, oh, are you a plotter or a pantser? Are you sort of plan it out into infinite detail, or do you just sit down, pick up a pen, find somebody, chuck a problem at them, and then just see what happens? I personally am somewhere in between the two. I usually have a structure, but I do periodically sort of think, oh, never mind that. I'm just go off with that tangent. So where are you on that? Do you think?
Well, I think I'm a bit in between as well. I mean, I do write a kind of synopsis, I suppose, or an outline. But it's true. It's like the characters. Once you start to get to know your characters, and if you work on something for long enough, you really do get to know them, and you think, "Oh, she wouldn't do that. I can't go down that road that I wanted to go down, because that wouldn't happen. She
Yeah.
wouldn't do that." or he wouldn't do that, or this might happen, and oh no, can't. And so yeah, I think the whole novel has ended up very different to the one it started out in 2014. It's a very different novel now. And I think, yeah, I don't think I'm a plotter. In fact, I know I'm not, because I downloaded that program about plotting that you can, and I can't do it. It doesn't work for me. I just have an idea and start, and then I usually have some sort of an outline. So yeah, like you, I think I'm
Yeah.
a bit of
Yeah,
both.
yeah, I usually know sort of roughly where it's going, but it's the sort of
Yeah.
bits. So tell us about, you talked a bit about your memoir, and I know you've written some poetry. So could you tell us about that? Is that, it's difficult to talk about the memoir perhaps, but could you just tell us a bit about it?
The memoir, yes. I mean, the memoir is here because I have my books all together here, which you can't see because they're behind. So this is the memoir,
Hmm.
and it's a much shorter than the novel. Um, and it's about my son, he was 27 when he died, and he was a graffiti artist, and he went to Portugal, and on Porto, and he climbed up on a roof to have a look to go where to go the next day. I think there was a railway line or something. They were going to go and do some, naughty boy, and he fell through a skylight, and he basically died straight away. And so it was a terrible, terrible. He was 27. It was terrible, and I found that I started to write to him almost immediately after it happened. And then a few years later, when I did my MA, as one of the modules, I started to write this memoir. And my tutor said, Ninette, this is very good. You've got a lot to share, and it would help people, and you should do it.
Mm.
So I did it, and published it. And I'm glad I did. And I think Kathy Rensenbrink was my mentor for that. And I know that she said, I mean, she's written loads and loads of stuff, but she said she could never really settle until she wrote the book about her brother dying. And once she'd done that, she felt she could move on and do anything. And so I'm wondering if that's, once Dear Tosh was done and out the way, I was able to go back and get stuck into loose end. Having said that, it's still been 3 years nearly since I published that. And so it's taken me 3 years to get around to doing it. But you know what it's like, Pauline. Paula, why do you call you Pauline? That's awful. You spend you
That's
spend you spend a long time after publication, doing this and doing that and promoting it and going around and all the rest of it. And the idea of getting down to doing something else takes a bit of time before you get down to it. So yeah, but I'm glad I have. I'm really glad I've written it. I really
Yeah,
am glad.
and I know it really affects a lot of people, helps them a good deal. So
Yeah.
it's really difficult. And I know there's a lot of love in it. It's not just about unhappiness. It's about love,
No,
and
I
it's about.
think it's a helpful, it's a book that's helped other people who've had, through loss and stuff.
And you also written some poetry.
Yes, well, I would say I dabble in poetry. I like it. I love it. And I think it's fun, but I'm not a deep sort of, I don't get into deep metaphor, and it's all very obvious, my poetry. It's not complicated, but I don't mind. That's the way I like it, really.
Yeah, sure, I'm sure people love it. So moving on then, and sort of what is in the pipeline. You've mentioned a couple of times that you're going to write another novel. Can you talk about what your ideas are, or
Well,
is all?
yeah, I mean, my next novel is the one I'm working on at the moment is actually set right at the beginning of the First World War, so it's quite a different sort of thing, obviously with different people, but I'm well through it. I'm 47,000 words in, so I know where it's going, but that also has gone off somewhere where it wasn't supposed to go. So I've got to go out and pull it all back, I think, really. And then, so it's set in Berlin, London and Berlin.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because Berlin's a wonderful city, and it's a great place to go and do research. Love it. I love it. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really good.
And of course, Berlin, before the war and then between the wars, is just a wonderful,
Fascinating. Yeah.
fascinating place. So I'm hoping that one might have a sequel, but I don't. We'll see. I'm
Okay.
thinking way ahead here. If it takes me 3 years every time, I shall have one foot where it shouldn't be by the time.
Might speed up now. You never know. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed reading Loose Ends, like I said, and I'm looking forward to the next one because obviously you know that I quite like that era too. So quite
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether you could close with reading an excerpt from Loose Ends to give us a taste of what happens.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll just read the very, very beginning, very short, because I'm sure everybody's had enough by now. I expect you have as well. I'm going to read the very short bit from the first chapter. So that's chapter 1. I've got it here, so I'm going to have to read it. I always think it's a shame I don't know it off by heart, because you know that this first chapter, this first bit, you don't look at once or twice or 10 times or 20 times, or you look at it very many times, and I should know it off by heart, but I don't. So this is chapter 1. Saturday, the 15th of March, 1941. In the small industrial town of Ridley, West Yorkshire, 2 young women walked out of the shirt factory gates together. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Ness had finished work for the day in the offices, and Eileen had clocked out as a buttonhole and side seamer on the shop floor. They were looking forward to the weekend. I was given a whole load of typing today. My fingers are killing me, said Ness, pulling her gloves on. I had to go to the packing department today. They were short. Some of the warehouse lads had been called up, said Eileen. Then she beamed, fumbled in her handbag, and pulled out a packet of cigarettes. She lit one, sucked on the first drag, and puffed out the smoke like her life depended on it. Ness watched her. Why have you got that stupid grin on your face? I wish you wouldn't smoke in the street, said Ness, running the 2 sentences in together. Then under her breath, just loud enough for Eileen to hear, I wish you wouldn't smoke at all. I don't care what you think about me smoking. As for the grin on my face, look over there. Ness looked to where Eileen was pointing with the lighter. A delivery van with Broderick's emblazoned on the side was driving out of the factory gates. So? There's 2 shirts in there with your name and address in the pockets. I wonder where they'll all end up. Eileen threw back her head and laughed like a lid rattling on a pot of boiling water. What the? I thought it'd be fun to write your name and address on a couple of little labels and put them in the pockets of the shirts I was packing today. You never know what might happen. How could you do that? What on earth? I'm seething, Eileen, blooming seething. Ness made to swipe Eileen, and Eileen, ducking out of the way, retorted, Come on, Ness. It's just a bit of a laugh. I bet you nothing happens. Nothing at all. But of course, quite a lot happens. Quite a lot of pages worth happens. I'm sorry, I didn't read it with the Yorkshire accent. I thought I'd better not bother, because if I did it, people would say, that's not right.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and many congratulations on publication. And
Thank
I
you.
hope that really, really well.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Lovely to talk to you. And I'm sorry I called you Pauline.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry, I've been called worse. Sir, probably the
Okay.
worst.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.